Welcome back to Become a Calm Mama. I'm your host. I'm Darlene Childress. And on this episode, I'm going to talk about what I'm calling the Screentime Dilemma. It's essentially the conflict or the overwhelm or the frustration you have as a parent when trying to figure out screen time limits. I'm going to normalize that and help you understand why it's so hard, and also why maybe this is like outside of your wheelhouse as a parent. I kind of say sometimes like screen time limits are a little bit above our pay grade as a parent, because really screen time is sort of the wild west of parenting, where there's not a lot of guidelines, there's not a lot of oversight. You're just one sheriff in a house full of screen robbers, and they want it all the time, and you don't really even know what the rules are or how to enforce them. And I want to give you some perspective on why that is, and give you some like a little tiny bit of history about how rules and limits and government establish guidelines, and kind of explain to you that when it comes to screens, this technology of devices for you and your family, the reason why it's so overwhelming and so confusing is because there are not guidelines yet. There is no license. There's no Surgeon General's warning. There's not a pamphlet, a food guide pyramid, if you will, or a my basic 4 food groups of how to manage screens for families. Because there aren't those guidelines yet that are out there, you are trying to figure it out all the time. What's normal? What's best? What's too much time? What's not enough time? What are the benefits of screen time? How much should my kid get? What devices? Is YouTube Kids okay? Is YouTube okay? Should they have a phone? What age? Is it 10? Is it 12? You are making all of these decisions that are extremely challenging to figure out because you're not an expert on the brain, on child development, on the ways that algorithms work around AI, right? You're just a regular person trying to figure it out. That is why it's so overwhelming. I want to go through and give you some background, like almost like a little history lesson about a couple of different topics, like how driver's license were created, how nutrition facts and food guidelines were created, and how, smoking guidelines were created. Because I want you to see that whenever a new tech comes in, whenever something hits the streets, right, it takes almost an entire generation, we're going to see, until the government recognizes, oh, this is a technology that's causing a problem. We probably need to protect children. We probably need to give the consumer more information. We might need to add regulation to this product or to this technology. And this has been true throughout time. So I'm going to give you a little background on a couple things. Hopefully it won't be too much of a history lesson. I hope to make it interesting. I used to teach history. Did you know that? I was a middle school and high school teacher before I was a parent and before I was a parenting coach. So I do like to talk about history and put things in perspective. I think it's really helpful to understand the way something has worked in the past and like the process that we went through as a society in the past, and kind of apply that to today. Really, I want you to understand that you are in the wild west of parenting, and for the most part, some other areas of parenting, you kind of know what's best. Like we've heard many times that 8 hours of sleep for adults is really good, right? And it's coming out that women need 8.5. Right? And so we kind of have this idea, like we know in general, you shouldn't have sugar at every meal, and there's not kind of no balanced diet. Like you should have fiber in your diet, and you should have fruits and vegetables, right? Lean meats. Just because your kid wants to drive a car at age 12, they can't, because they need a driver's license. So there's a lot of things in parenting that there's a mental map for how it should be. But when it comes to tech and to screens, there's no social mental map. We are all making it up as we go along. And newsflash, it's not working out very well, okay? It's hurting our children. As you know from my previous series in the summer, based on Jonathan Haidt's book, Anxious Generation, and I gave you a lot of screen time practices in those episodes. So go back if you're really, wanting to dive deep into what are the problems and all that, go back into those episodes and listen to them. But today I want you to walk away from this episode feeling like an exhale, but really like a self-esteem boost. Like I want you to be able to not feel like you are a failure as a parent because you can't get screen limits managed in your family, or that your kids keep doing sneaky screens, or you break your own rules, or whatever it is. I don't want you to feel so bad. I want you to understand, oh, I am a trailblazer. I am a first generation parent parenting in a tech environment. I am a vanguard, right? I'm at the forefront. The next few generations, they're going to have it easier. I'm figuring it out without a guideline. And I want you to really kind of give yourself like a pat on the back, because I do deeply believe that in the next 10 years, there are going to be government guidelines and even regulations about how tech is talked about and communicated to children, what is allowed for children, and all of these things. So in 10 years from now, that doesn't help you, right? If you have a 4-year-old and at 14, they come out with some guidelines and you're like, well, I wish I would have known that at 4. I have 18 and 20-year-olds. My kids are Gen Z. I was in the Wild West of parenting. Like, I did not have an iPhone when they were born, and then I had an iPhone. And so I'm figuring out the tech alongside of figuring it out with them. I did my best, right? As you are. And so I wanted to normalize that you're in the Wild West of parenting. You're doing your best. You don't have a social mental map. What's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad, best practices. So I will give you some best practices at the end of this episode. But I wanted to go through and talk about some of this history that I was talking about. So first I want to start with cars, and I promise I won't get too into the weeds on the details because, historians love dates. But I want you to see that the first modern car, what we generally regard as the first modern car, was invented by Carl Benz, right? Like Mercedes-Benz, kind of that Benz, B-E-N-Z. And it was in 1886. Okay. So just kind of like, I don't even know, was that 150 years ago-ish, right? So the first car kind of was registered, the patent was registered. Over time, more people got them because of the Model T with Henry Ford. Cars started replacing horses and started replacing horse-drawn carriages. Now, we did not need to create rules of who could ride a horse. We didn't have to create licenses for who could own a horse or drive a horse into town because they weren't that unsafe. They weren't motorized. But then think about this, that the first stop sign was not installed until 1914 in Detroit. You have how many years is that? 30 years-ish of cars on the roads without stop signs. That was kind of the beginning. It took a long time before some city, the city of Detroit, is like, we should put a stop sign here and make there be some sort of traffic pattern or regulation. The government of Detroit, right, the city, does not get involved for a long time because they don't even know the problems that are going to be created. The first car that had a seatbelt, 1950. We're talking 66 years later, we create a seatbelt. That's a long time to have a technology without a safety mechanism. So the safety mechanisms were happening on the car, right? And some things in the city. And then over time, it was decided that maybe we needed driver's licenses. About 20 years after the car was invented, we start to see driver's licenses. The first was in New York, then Massachusetts, and then slowly over time, more and more states create driver's license. 20 years of having cars before we have a driver's license. It wasn't until the 1950s until all states had a driver's license system. So you have vehicles for 70 years before the entire United States has driver's license. If you're listening in other countries, I don't really know the statistics of other countries. When did we decide that children shouldn't get their driver's license? When was that established? And it was in Pennsylvania was the first state that said drivers needed to be at least 18 years old. So now you start to see 30 years after the car is invented, there's some rules around when children should be able to get a driver's license. Start to really think about 30 years, an entire generation of children probably trying to drive cars, which is kind of like what we're experiencing is like children trying to navigate screen rules for themselves. It's not possible. We don't want children driving cars, nor do we really want children driving the internet, but we don't have any rules yet about it. It wasn't until 1966 that the federal government of the United States created the National Traffic and Motor Vehicle Safety Act. That was 78 years after the car was patented. 78 years. That's an entire lifetime, right? That's 3 generations before we have really strong regulatory rules. I thought this was kind of funny. In California, they created a little booklet of like rules for the road. And that was like a really, really thin booklet. And now it's 1,000 pages. So I think that we might have gone overboard on creating rules. I'm not sure. I don't know. I've never read the California Vehicle Code. But now we're like in this, a lot of government regulations when it comes to driving. But my point is that in the beginning, there were none. And now there's a lot. So in the beginning, nobody knew who should drive and how do we prove that they can. And then eventually, it was like, oh, we need a learner's permit. Oh, we need to have them do a written exam. Oh, we need to have them do a physical exam. There was like more and more guidelines. That's my whole point, okay? Also, they changed the laws, a lot of states, from 18 to 15 or 16 or 17. Different states have different licensing agreements, but we all agree, right? We all agree 8-year-olds shouldn't drive cars. Right? We all agree that you should be an adolescent before you even get permission to be behind the wheel. Now, I know really rural places, those rules are less applicable because people drive farm trucks and things like that. Young people will participate in the like homesteading and things like that. But we're talking about for public safety in general, what is the best practices? And we've all decided somewhere between 16 and 17, we think that people are mature enough to handle a vehicle. But we have no guidelines yet for how old someone should be able to handle the internet. I was talking to my husband about this topic just a few minutes ago, and I was telling him what I was going to talk about. And I said, do you remember when I used to tell the kids, like they'd be like, Mom, can I have a phone? Mom, can I have a phone? And I'd be like, no, I'm not giving you the www. And they'd be like, what? And I'd be like, I'm not giving you the www. I'm not giving you the World Wide Web. I said, we have the entire world on the internet. I'm not handing you the world. You're not ready. You're not ready for the world. I would make it a joke, right? And I'd be like, you can't handle the world. The www. But it is true. Do I think an 8-year-old can handle navigating the entire World Wide Web? Nope, I do not. I do not think they should have unlimited access to that. Now, a couple other examples I thought were kind of interesting one was around food. So this could bother people. I don't know. But in general, prior to the 1960s, most food was prepared at home with basic ingredients, which means it was like whole food like butter or wheat or, sugar, but you could see how much you were pouring into something. You had beef, you had chicken, you had eggs, like you had the ingredients, you had the whole ingredients, and then you were preparing the food. But after World War II, when there was all this revolution in terms of creating technology for the war, basically for, ammunition and I don't know all the words for war stuff, but war stuff, airplanes and bombers and I don't know. A lot of technology was created in order to create that machinery. And then when the war was over, production shifted to creating new types of machines for home life. So that's when we started to see a washing machine and refrigerator and refrigeration and different things like that. Not only did they create consumer goods, but they also created a lot more machinery for agriculture. This is the end of the history lesson, I promise. But there was a revolution in agricultural technology. And food science was developed, advancements in food science. So we had this technology being created that increased the amount of food, and farming changed. How we produced food changed, how we processed food, stored food, and distributed food. Then there was also advancements in terms of freeze drying, juice concentrates, artificial sweeteners, coloring agents, preservatives. All these different things happened at the same time as the food industrial revolution was happening. So all of a sudden, there is a glut of cheap processed foods on the market. And we start to see that the processed foods become common in the marketplace. Then, alongside of that, the Surgeon General starts to notice in the 80s, so 30 years later, they start to notice that we as a society have decreased nutrition, poor health, chronic diseases going up. And they're starting to look at the diet of the American people and saying, hey, we might have some problems here. We probably need to do some education, right? They don't really put any limitations on what can be allowed to be produced. They don't create any guidelines around what the producers can put out there. So you can have, there's like titanium dioxide in Skittles, right? Like there's not a lot of guidelines about what gets put out, but there was a lot of consumer education provided. So you had the FDA, the Federal Drug Administration or Food and Drug Administration, saying we need to have nutrition labels. That happened in 1990, that there was published proposed rules for the mandatory nutrition labeling of almost all packaged food. That was so that consumers could make good choices. But if you're a consumer and you don't know what any of those things mean, you don't know what carbohydrate is or fiber or sugar or calories, that means we need to create education for the consumer. So that's when you start to see food guides. Before World War II, food guides were created in order to make sure you got enough nutrition. They were like, you need to make sure your children get enough calories. So they started to tell people, hey, this is the bare minimum of what you need to provide, because there was a Great Depression, there was a Dust Bowl, there was all these problems in our society where there wasn't enough food. Then slowly, there's a lot of food. So the education shifts from make sure your kids get these basic nutrients to actually make sure you limit these other types of foods. Let's make better food choices. So I think it's fascinating that you can see, and I'm not like Miss Government Regulation, bring it all on. I'm only wanting to point out that technology comes out and it has an effect on society. And we don't always know what those effects are going to be. For one, if you look at the food thing, you don't have people starving. Amazing, right? That's a good thing. We want to have a plethora of food. But we also created poor quality food in order to get it to more people. And then we had health. So then you need education. And then you start to see, like when I was a kid, it was the 4 basic food groups, right? And they were like, you have to have the 4 basic food groups. And they were just a rectangle with 4 squares. And that was what you put on your plate. Then they created the food guide pyramid, and it was super confusing. Nobody really understood what it meant. And now they have My Plate, which is simplified everything. So you see that the government is like, we probably need to give guidelines. And then as the person in the home who is purchasing food and preparing food and serving food to your children and yourself, you can make an informed decision. So you look at cars, you have the ability to make an informed decision about when your child should drive. At the bare minimum, your kid cannot get their driver's license or their permit until this certain age, 14, 15, 16, depends on the state. But around adolescence, that is the rule. And it's to protect the children and protect others on the streets. With food, the government is like, here is all the food. You can have everything at the market. There it is. And in general, this is the best practices for your children. This is what they should make sure that they have access to at each meal. So there's guidelines. But we look at screen time and there are no guidelines. You're making it up. You're like, what is the food guide pyramid version of tech screen limits? What is My Plate for my tech? And there's no answer yet, right? The good news is that answers are coming, that the Surgeon General of the United States is creating recommendations, and we are moving towards having guidelines. Okay. The last one was smoking. I won't go too far into it because it's so obvious, but I thought this was interesting that there was some changes in the way that cigarettes were made, and it made it a lot easier to get cigarettes. And that kind of was part of the, tech and agriculture revolution, is that you could get packaged cigarettes a lot easier. You didn't have to just get tobacco and get paper and roll it yourself. That there was almost like processed, ready-made cigarettes. And then more people started smoking. The government starts to see a lung cancer epidemic. And of course, the cigarette manufacturers are like, no, we didn't cause these problems. That's not us. Who knows what's going on? But over time, the evidence became something you cannot ignore. And that's when you start to see rules. You start to see that, like in 1964, the Surgeon General publishes smoking is bad for you. And then they put a label within that year. They put a label on the cigarettes. And then they just start banning advertising on television and radio. Then they start to establish a minimum age of legal access. So at first, that legal access was, and this was in 1920, by the way, that the legal access was 21 years old. You could not get cigarettes 100 years ago unless you were 21. Then it went down to 18. And now, as of 2019, 100 years later, it went back to 21. President Trump signed that legislation when he was president in 2019. We see that we have rules around when children can smoke, when children can drink, when children can drive. We've given families, parents, guidelines of what are the best practices when it comes to feeding your children. You know, in general, how much sleep they should get. Now, here's the thing with the internet. The internet, I thought this was so fascinating. It came out in 1993. The WWW became public. I graduated high school in 1993. So kind of my adult life, I've been learning about the internet, right? But it's all been in my adulthood. The internet is a fairly new technology, and then we don't have smartphones or handheld devices that access the internet until 2008, 2009, 2010, something like that. And they don't become ubiquitous for a while, being in everybody's hand. But now that it's been 20 years or so, we can start to see that there are foundational harms on children when they have access to internet-based activities. They are deprived socially, their sleep is impacted, their attention is fragmented, and it creates addictive tendencies. This is from Jonathan Haidt, the author of Anxious Generation. We have quote from Vivek Murthy, who is the Surgeon General of the United States. And he says, this is a quote, "The mental health crisis among young people is an emergency, and social media has emerged as an important contributor." And he's mostly talking about adolescents. And he says a Surgeon General's warning label, which requires congressional action, would regularly remind parents and adolescents that social media has not proved safe. We need more regulation when it comes to technology in our children's hands. I actually don't think a warning to protect adolescents is enough. I think we need to go to younger ages and create guidelines for younger ages before they get to 14 or into adolescence. So I have some best practices, which I do talk about in my previous episode, but I think in general, no child should have a smartphone or a handheld device until 8th grade. There is a movement called Wait Until 8th. And if we can get more and more people to commit just to say to their friend group, hey, we're not going to do devices until 8th grade. That is a powerful statement, and it will be contagious. You can influence the people around you by saying we are going to wait until 8th. No smartphone. And I'm going to go further to say no iPad. I think the iPad is a cheat that a lot of parents will use, is they get an iPad and then the kid has this handheld device with the iPad. It's Not maybe they're looking on Instagram because they're 7, but they're getting accustomed to having an individual handheld device at a young age that they think is theirs. No devices. No child should own a device. Be honest with you, my kids each had, back then they were called iTouches, and they were allowed to use those on car rides longer than an hour and a half and airplane flights. And that was it. So it was road trips and flying. And then when we get to our destination on the vacation, they would get put away. We actually would put them in the safe, in the hotel safe or whatever, because I didn't want my kids on those devices, on individual handheld devices. Another really important guideline, no social media until 16. I didn't do that. I don't know. I think my kids got smartphones in 8th grade. And then I don't know, I just didn't even really know how to put limitations on social media. But I think, it's a really good recommendation. And if everybody does it, then everybody does it. Just like you could let your 14-year-old drive a car, but everyone would be like, you're crazy. And you almost want to create the you're crazy to be like, you don't let your kids go on social media? You're crazy. We want to flip that to be like, what? You let your kids go on social media? You're crazy. Right? We kind of need to change our social understanding of what's good and bad for kids. Other recommendations, no screens before school. That is not a great time for kids to be watching TV or on devices. Absolutely. They need to be getting ready for school so your morning routine goes smoothly and kind of doing a little play, being in their body before they go sit in a classroom. I would recommend no screens on school days at all. But if you do them, wait for an hour after they've been home from school before they get their device or get to watch TV. I love collaborative or social viewing or watching. So I would recommend having, instead of individual devices, that kids learn to compromise, to sit in the living room, pick something to watch, pick something to play, and participate together and have a mutual experience, a shared experience, because that creates a little bit more of that social cohesion. And also compromise and things like that, taking turns. Making a commitment, I said that, like as a community, if schools could take on commitments, principals and teachers really talking about this and committing as a school, let's do screen-free weeks, let's not do tech in the morning, no children should have a phone before 8th grade. If we had more social normalizing of that in our communities, that would be great. And then we should be demanding government action. We really should. And I'm trying to think if there was one other one. I can't remember. Okay. The other thing, I was writing, if I was in charge of the government, what would I do? I don't know. I'm not in charge of the government, but I was thinking we should have universal hardware bans. So really the technology available to kids in 8th grade, you can do hardware bans where certain serial numbers of devices are not allowed to download social media, but the hardware bans only happen at the platform level. Like the Snapchat can do a hardware ban on your phone, but it's not with your IP address, it's not your internet address, it's the actual serial number of the hardware itself. When I learned that, I realized we could probably be doing hardware specific for children that you can't put social media apps on there, and limit the ability for kids to circumvent family screen time limits, through your own screen time app and the Aura and the Eero and all those things. Really kind of having it be you purchase a kid-friendly phone. Wouldn't that be amazing? Because a lot of you want your kids to have access to phones, but that they'll be able to get on sneaky screens and stuff like that. But if there was hardware bans, it would be helpful. I was thinking about this. I was like, why don't we have an internet license? If you have to have a license to drive or an age limit for smoking, why do we not have an age limit for phones? You can buy this phone once you've taken this class and you've shown me that you know how to navigate bullying, or I don't know what the rules would be, but I was like, why don't we create an internet license? I told you, I'm making it up. No screens or tech in schools. I don't know why it's necessary for kids to have a Chromebook. The Chromebook is a huge problem for parents. It's a big old issue at home to get them off of it. They lie, they sneak, they tell us we have homework all the time. If you want to have device use in the school, have it in the school. but don't put that on the family to also have device use. I know the intention was to make sure that everybody had access to technology. I love that, making a more equal society and more equitable access to tech. I get it. It is important. And it's creating a lot of social harm. So I don't know which is more important. We kind of need to think about that. So getting rid of Chromebooks or only having Chromebooks at school, something like that. I was thinking maybe we have Face ID, right? To determine your age before you can launch YouTube or Discord or TikTok or Snapchat or Instagram or whatever technology is coming down the pike. There are better Face ID scans. I don't really love the idea of having children's faces on the internet. So I don't know. I don't know how to do it properly, but I just was thinking it would be cool if you could verify somebody's age through a verification system that was kind of established. We need a universal kids messaging app probably, or something like that. If kids are going to have devices and they want to talk to each other through devices, we probably need to figure that out. Maybe that is on the television. So it's kind of like old school. You know who they're talking to. You can hear them talking. You can see the person's face. It's, I don't know, some sort of messaging app or some kind of way to communicate, FaceTime, things like that. But in the family environment, not on tiny little devices that are easy to hide. And then, of course, I'm in full favor of a Surgeon General warning, but not just on apps. I think we need a Surgeon General warning on the devices themselves. Whew. Okay. This episode is for you to know that you are not alone. If you're struggling with screen limits and not knowing and feeling confused and overwhelmed, I hope some of these suggestions I gave at the end and like in previous episodes are helpful. But I also want you to know you're in the Wild West of parenting. You are a trailblazer when it comes to tech and children, and you're doing your best. And I'm here to help guide you and create your family limits, find out what actually works for your family and what you need. So that's some of the things we do in the Calm Mama Club. You know, we talk about screens a lot. We talk about homework. We talk about chores. We talk about tidying up. We talk about bedtime. We talk about all the basics, right, that families struggle with in their homes. And of course, screen limits. This is new generationally, and it's a challenge. And I just want to give you a hug because it's so hard. And I also want to give you an attaboy, right? Like I want to give you like a, slap on the back, like good job, you're doing great. And then like a little swat on the tush, like get back out there, you can do it. So apparently I just want to hug you and support you. So think about your own rules and what works for you. You're in the Wild West, so that means you get to make it up and you get to decide and you get to enforce those limits. And remember, your kids hate limits because people do, but deep down they love them. I don't love a speed limit on a freeway, but I also do like a speed limit because when somebody goes really fast near me and they're going 100 and I'm going, 70, I'm like, whoa, they're going so fast. Geez, they're totally going past the speed limit. Like, it makes me feel unsafe. So I like speed limits. I like rules because it helps us all kind of trust each other a little bit more. And we know that we're healthy and thriving as a society. So don't be afraid to put those rules in place, Mama. You've got it. And if you need any help, I'm here. Reach out, book a consult with me, free discovery consultation, or just join the Calm Mama Club. $30 a month. You can join anytime. Show up at a Tuesday call and I'll get right into coaching you. All right. Greetings from the Wild West, and I will see you next time. Hey Mama, if you enjoyed this podcast episode, I want to encourage you to do two things. The first is go to my website, calmmamacoaching.com, and get a copy of the Stop Yelling cheat sheet. You'll get a step-by-step breakdown of the most important tool I teach, which is the pause break. And you'll also get 40 ideas to reset your body and balance your nervous system so you don't have to yell at your kids. You can get a copy of that, again, at my website, calmmamacoaching.com/stop yelling. The other thing I'd love for you to do is go to Apple Podcasts and rate and review this podcast so that other moms can discover empowering and helpful, practical parenting strategies just like you did today. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. It means a lot to be in your ear every week and to support you on your parenting journey.